All right, so let's get started. And right here on the main page here of the fi360 Toolkit, really what we want to talk about first is a due diligence process. And there are two ways that you can manage a due diligence process and create a due diligence process if you need to. The first way is the fi360 fiduciary score, which hopefully everyone's familiar with. And then the second way that you can work and develop through a due diligence process is creating your own custom due diligence. If you have the platinum version of the toolkit, you can do that by going up to settings, user settings, and due diligence criteria. So again, the first way is using the fi360 fiduciary score, and then the second way is this due diligence area that we can work through, and we'll do this right now. All right, so to create your own custom due diligence, what you can do is go into this user settings area and create custom due diligence. Now, these first, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 items listed here. These are all defaults stored in the system, and these are defaults when we go to select our due diligence process for our client. If you jump right into the toolkit as a brand new user, or if you use a different version of the toolkit besides Platinum, you'll have these 5 items listed for your client when you jump into the IPS, which we'll see here in a few moments. But if you want to create your own custom, you can. I've created 3 different options here. One's called Fiduciary Score 30. So let's take a quick look at that, because this is one way that you can customize due diligence. And that's simply by using the fiduciary score, changing the threshold. You may have noticed on the other page that those defaults stored in the system, the threshold for each of those items, the fiduciary score, the quarter, the 1, 3, 5-year averages, were all less than or equal to 25. One common question that we have is, I want to use the fiduciary score, but I want to change the threshold. So to do that, all you need to do is create your own custom due diligence. I simply go in here, select one of the factors that I want. In my example here, I've selected the quarter score, and then I change the threshold to whatever I want it to be. Some people like it to be less than or equal to 50. Some people want to move it up a little bit, like 30, like I had in here stored in the system. And then that's simply all you need to do. If you want to still use the fiduciary score but change that threshold, that's how you can build that into the toolkit. Notice how I've named it Fiduciary Score 30 over on the right-hand side, something that I hopefully will recognize when I'm using this in my client. But all I need to do now is click on Save and Exit. And now I've created a fiduciary score process that simply changed the threshold. That's one way that you can manage this information in the system. Another way is to go and create a completely separate due diligence process, completely outside of the fiduciary score. Why would you want to do this? One reason, again, we certainly like the fiduciary score, but we don't want to discriminate against your own process if you've developed one. So we'll go in and create and look at this M&D advisors criteria, and this is a completely separate process created outside the fiduciary score. Another reason you may want to create separate due diligence criteria if you're working with a client and they've developed their own due diligence process, or perhaps you're just importing another due diligence process set up by a different advisor and you want to show that same due diligence process in the toolkit. What I'd recommend is going in here and creating custom due diligence and giving it a client name. So it may be 4th Avenue Associates 401k plan due diligence criteria. So you know that that criteria is just for that client. But whatever you choose, you can do that in this area. To create new criteria, I just click on the Go button, and this will essentially take me into this factors and thresholds, same area that we were in before when we were looking at that fiduciary score criteria. But now, in my example, I'm simply selecting from any of these different factors available to me on the left-hand side. So obviously I've already selected a few, but if I wanted to add one more, such as alpha, I can select it over on the left-hand side, use the arrow button to move it over. It puts it down here in the middle here, and then I can change the threshold. I can change it amongst any of those different options available in this drop-down. Once I've selected the factors that I want from the left-hand side, changed or altered the thresholds, I can click on Save and Exit. Now this is the first step in your custom due diligence process if you have more than one factor. My fiduciary score 30, it only has one factor, so really if I just have one factor, that's really all I need to select, that one factor. But if I have several factors like I do listed here, the second area that I want to go into, actually let's jump back out, and it's actually probably reset everything for me since I clicked Save. But the second area that I want to jump into is called Level of Importance. In this Level of Importance area, not only do you set the level of importance, but it's also very important in your due diligence process because it creates a lot of flexibility in your process. If we had just selected those 7 or 8 factors like I did on the previous page and then started to use that criteria and use that custom criteria with a client, the system is going to treat each of those factors and thresholds as required. And what that means is that each of those factors would have to pass for a client investment. We'll see how that works in the client area. But if you're looking at a mutual fund and you have certain factors and thresholds set up, what you essentially done is selected a pretty stringent process because it may have to pass some pretty high thresholds, and it may have to pass high thresholds across 7, 8, 9, 10 different factors. That's a pretty high hurdle to cross for any one investment. So what you can do in this level of importance area is add a lot of different flexibility into your process. And we can do it in a couple different ways. On this page listed here, on the far left-hand side are my factors and thresholds that I've selected. So my fiduciary score quarter is one factor that I've selected, but I've also selected things like the net expense ratio, the 3-year return. In addition to that, I have my threshold listed. Now the ways that I can begin to customize it are listed here in this table. The first way that I can customize it is by not only looking at the most recent period, but looking at a time span, looking at several different periods in my evaluation process. This will create a historical perspective to your due diligence process that you may want to introduce. So looking at my first example here, the fiduciary score quarter, I'm indicating here that I want it to pass 4 of the last 6 periods. And in the toolkit, right now we have periods as different quarters since we update the data on a quarterly basis. So what I'm saying is I want it to pass 4 quarters out of the last 6. I want it to look at the last year and a half, and the fund needs to pass the last 4. So that's how I built my custom criteria. All the other items listed, except for this 5-year return, are past 1 out of the last 1. That simply means I'm looking at the most recent period, and that's all I'm doing. I'm not looking back any farther in time than the most recent period listed in the toolkit. Now this 5-year return, again, just another example. It's saying I'm passing 3 out of the last 4. So I'm looking at the past 4 periods, and the investment needs to pass my threshold, top 50th percentile for the 5-year return, for the past 3 out of 4 quarters. So that's one way that you can add some flexibility into your custom due diligence process. Another way is to define the criterion importance level. And again, as I mentioned, when you first selected those factors and thresholds, they're all going to be set to required. So let me set a couple to required. And what that means is if any one factor is designated as required, that item needs to pass for the investment to be kept off the watch list when we view that in our process. So if I have 3 required factors and I'm evaluating an investment, the investment's going to be evaluated against this entire set. But if any one of these 3 required factors fails, then all bets are off. That fund is going to be automatically placed on the watch list. So again, you may want to introduce 1 or 2 or maybe even 3 of those required factors into the process. But keep in mind, if you do, that's going to add inflexibility into the process. That's going to increase that hurdle that the investment needs to cross, which again, you may want to do that, but just keep that in mind if as you're doing that. I'm going to select every item except for the first item to be optional. And now what that does for me is that I have all these into the optional bucket. And if you look over here on the right-hand side, I have this optional criterion section here. And what I'm indicating is I have 8 optional criterion selected. But what I'm saying here is I want 6 of those optional criterion to be met. So if I'm looking through this historical evaluation, looking through the factor and threshold, and the investment passes, well, that's great. It's going to be marked on in our reporting as a pass. But if some of these start to fail, say this first item fails, the net expense ratio, and the 3-year return fails, that's two nicks on my investment as it goes through this process. It's going to still pass because I'm looking to say 6 out of 8. But if that third item fails, then that fund is going to be placed on the watch list. Now, it can go through any of those items at all. It doesn't matter which ones pass or fail. As long as you're passing 6 out of 8, that investment is going to be kept off of the watch list. So again, another way that you can add flexibility into that custom process. The third item that we have here is called missing data treatment. So this is really more of a way that you can handle missing data than a flexibility, but it certainly adds a lot of flexibility into the process. Missing data simply means that if the data is missing for that investment. Now, if you're familiar with the Toolkit and you've been a subscriber for some time, you may note that up until our spring update, which we performed in March 2011, the Toolkit had more missing data. There was a lot more missing data because we weren't looking at extended performance data. That means we weren't looking at the parent share class of a fund. So if you were looking at an R share and that R share had only been around for a year, we weren't going to show a 3, a 5, or a 10-year value for a return. We were just showing that 1-year return. So as we've added that extended performance data in the spring, again, this missing data has become less of a factor, but it still can come into play, especially with an example that we have listed here for 10-year return. So for 10-year return, you may be evaluating investment. You want to include that in your process, a 10-year return in the top 50th percentile of its peer group. But for the simple fact that not every fund in the fund universe has been around for 10 years, you may come across funds in your client's plan or portfolio that just don't have 10 years of return. So you don't want to ding that fund just because it's missing that data. What we can do is we can treat that as a pass in our process, and then the process will skip over that 10-year return. So with all that being said, the goal of this page is to add flexibility, to look at the process and make it standard again, but to add flexibility into that process so you're not always placing a fund on watch. So once we've gone through this process, we can click on our Save button, and now we've created our custom due diligence. So this is how we've created custom due diligence. Again, if you wanted to use your own or our own fi360 fiduciary score, you can certainly do that. But the next step in the watch list process is to take that criteria, whether, again, the fiduciary score or your own custom due diligence, and apply it to a client. And the place that you do that is by going into the client area and then selecting a client. Let's pull up 4th Avenue, my favorite client. And then going into the most recent data period or any other period that you want to, but then going into the investment policy statement. Now, as you may know, the investment policy statement, it's that business document that you work with your client, and you want to spell out exactly how you're working through their client goals and their requirements with that document. A critical step in that document is the selection and watch list criteria. And this is where you're going to set the due diligence process for your client. We have both, and actually let me just jump in here, we have both implementation criteria, which are the criteria that you're going to follow as you select new investments to be added into a plan or portfolio. And then we have our monitoring and watch list process, which will be the ongoing due diligence process that you're using in your reporting to show to the client the process that's ongoing. We recommend that you select both the same criteria for both implementation and monitoring, but again, you may want to add some flexibility where you're selecting a high standard for the implementation and then setting the bar just a little bit lower for the ongoing monitoring, just because you want to ensure that the funds don't come on the watch the very next quarter just because it drops a % or two below your selection criteria. So however you choose to do that, we can select our criteria. Again, the default fiduciary score option, my custom fiduciary score option, or my M&D advisor's criteria, and then I'm going to store that in the system for my client. Once I've done that, I can produce an IPS, and if we pull this up pretty quickly, we can see that our IPS document, if we scroll down, will have not only our implementation criteria listed, both our fiduciary score and our custom process, but then also our ongoing monitoring process as well, the watch list criteria. So it's spelled out in the investment policy statement, what we're going to be using in our process to place a fund on the watch list. So where does the rubber meet the road here? Where does this come into play? We can begin to look at this on an ongoing basis if we go into the holdings section and then go into the watch list notes area. We jump in here, we'll quickly be able to see the decisions that are being made for the client investments. Obviously, we've selected the client investments and they're showing here on this page, but if we go into this watch list area, which hopefully will come up shortly here with our low internet, that it'll show the watch list process for our investments. And we can quickly see in this meets IPS monitoring criteria column the investments that are passing and the investments that are failing. So to look at the very last fund here, this principal mid-cap blend, we can see that it's passing our monitoring criteria, whether it's the fiduciary score or our custom due diligence, and by default, the investment is being kept off the watch list. Conversely, this Principia Lifetime 2030 is failing our criteria, and it's being placed on the watch list because of that item. And that's how a lot of advisors run the process. It's an automated process, simply going into the system, setting that due diligence process, and then whether the investments are passing or failing, they're having the system designate their final watch list status, and that's what they're showing to their clients. And that may be one way to run that process. Certainly a very valid way to run that process because, again, it's all tying back to the investment policy statement. Obviously, you may want to dig a little bit deeper and perform some other due diligence, and for whatever reason, you may find that based on other due diligence factors that you want to use, that fund may conversely need to be placed on or off, contrary to what this monitoring criteria says. So looking at this American Funds Euro Pacific, the very first fund, again, it's passing our criteria, but it's actually on the watch list. So what happened? Why is this fund on watch? I've gone into the system and made an overriding decision, what we call a manual decision, to place this fund on watch. So obviously, as you can see, you as the user of the toolkit have the final say in the watch list decision. It's a good start to be looking at that IPS, but the final decision is yours. We click on the edit link, we can see how I made that decision. I can go into the system, and looking at this, I've actually made two decisions, but let's keep it a little bit clearer here. I can make a client-specific decision. That means that for my client, 4th Avenue Associates, select them there, and just for this fund, American Funds Euro Pacific, I can make a decision to keep the fund on watch or off watch. This is going to override any other decision made in the system based on my monitoring criteria in the IPS. So let's say I want to keep it off. Another decision I can make is a global decision. And this global decision is in the second level, and we'll talk about the watch list decision hierarchy in a few minutes here. But this decision is being made globally, and what that means is for every client in the toolkit now, not just Fourth Avenue, but every client that holds American funds, I've gone in and made a decision to keep the fund on or take it off the watch list. So a great way to manage that from a global perspective, and then storing that in the system. So I've done that. I've taken it off, and actually let me go back and fix it so we show exactly what we want to show. Well, I'll do that later. Maybe not. But essentially what we're looking at is, again, making an overriding decision to make that final watch list status decision that will be stored in the toolkit and then also show in the reporting. Just to kind of wrap up the process that you may follow, again, if you're making a watch list decision to take the fund off watch and note that you've been doing that for several periods, you may want to make a decision to replace the fund. You can flag that fund. And what I'd always recommend, especially if you're making a watch list status decision that's contradictory to the monitoring criteria, so if you're making an overriding decision and you're also maybe flagging the investment as a replacement, you may want to add some notes into the system to document your reasoning again in the toolkit and in the reports. Let's go back here just a few moments and talk about this decision. So let me take everything off here. All right, get back to where we were before and talk about this process of the client-specific decision and the global decision. How do those affect one another in the watch list process, and how does the system kind of go through the process of looking at the final decision if you made manual decisions on a client globally and your IPS is saying another thing? Well, there's 3 levels that it goes through again. Looking at the investment policy statement monitoring criteria first, our number 1. The next step is they're looking at the global decision, number 2, and then looking finally at the client-specific decision. So in terms of decision making, the last item here, this client-specific decision, will override any global decision made, and then a global decision will override that monitoring criteria. So let's take a look at a few examples here. So this is a pretty straightforward example. We have an investment that is on watch based on the monitoring criteria, and there's no global decision, no client-specific decision. So the final watch list status that you'll see in the toolkit and the reports is that the fund is on watch. Pretty straightforward. Another example here is this example number 2. Now in this example, our fund is off watch, just like it was in the previous example, but now we have a global decision, and that global decision is going to override the IPS decision. So based on that global decision override, our final watch list status is off watch. Oops, wrong way. So let's take a look where there's 3 different decision levels, and our IPS monitoring criteria is that the fund is off watch. Our global decision is that the fund is on watch. And if you recall in example 2, that global decision should override that IPS decision. But now we have a third decision for the client, and that's placing it back off watch. So based on that third decision that we made here, client-specific, this fund is off watch in the reporting and in the toolkit. So hopefully that makes sense. Again, there's 3 different levels that it goes through. But in the end, just take a look at the watch list decisions, any overriding decisions that have been made in the toolkit. All right. So with all that being said, we're making all these decisions. We're making them in the toolkit, but we're in this client here. So we're in Fourth Avenue. And you can certainly jump into each of the clients, review the watch list status, make any decisions that you may want to, flag the investments, make some notes, however you want to manage that system. But to do it by going into each client, it may take some time for you. One of the nice features of the Platinum Toolkit is the ability to go in and manage those from a global perspective. So let's take a look at manual decisions from a global perspective now. And in this page here, I've gone into settings and watch list management. And on this page here, I can simply go in and make one of those manual decisions. So again, in my example, that Euro Pacific, I had that on watch. And I did that globally. Now, say for example, I want to make that decision. I'm sure that a couple of my clients have owned that investment. I'm not quite sure who it is. I don't want to spend time searching for that investment. So I can simply go into this manual decision area, type in a ticker, and I'm just going to type in a random one, this Vanguard Financial ETF. And now, without having to know which client holds which investment and who holds what and where I need to find that, I can simply jump in here. And if I want to make one of those global decisions, I can make a global decision to keep it off for Alex. And maybe I want to make a global decision to keep it on. So I can make whatever decision I need to in this system. So I made my global decisions manually without jumping into a client. Now, one other item to keep note of is these decisions are stored in the toolkit historically. So if we go and look on the right-hand side, I can look and see what the decisions were from period to period in the toolkit. Change it to March 30. See, I only have a few decisions there. And if I go to September 30, I have more decisions here. So again, you can jump into the system and you need to update those on a period-by-period basis. One simple way that you can do that, and let me just do something simple here. And bear with me for just a second. I'm going to take, let's see. All right. So bear with me for just a second. And what I've done is I've actually gone in and overridden everything for September. So if I go into this page, and this is what you may see when you jump into the manual decision page for the first time, especially after we've updated the data. So we have a blank slate here, and you can jump in and start to make those manual decisions if you need to. So I can jump in and type in an investment, make a decision, and make those decisions for September 30th based on the criteria that I'm looking at. A more appropriate way that you may want to start, though, is by copying the decisions from the prior period. So you made a whole series of decisions in the prior period, and you may want to actually copy those over into the current period to start from, not starting from scratch, but starting from a base of decisions that you made last period. So to do that, I'm just going to jump into this copy area, which I was secretly working with previously. And I want to select the time period that I want to copy from. So I want to select last period, June 30, and I want to select the most recent period, September 30, and then just copy. So that's going to copy all my decisions from June 30, and now I'm starting September 30 with a base of decisions that I've already made in the toolkit. It may take a second or two here, but it's going to copy everything, and now you're starting off from this page here. I promise it's going to copy. It's not the website, it's our internet access. But once this gets copied over, we'll move on to the next section. Actually, let me just do that here. All right. Actually, there it goes. It copied everything. It heard that I was talking ill of it, and it finished its process. So I've copied everything over from June 30, and now I have this new process that I can start off with Maybe I want to delete one or two of these. Maybe I want to simply make some changes. This Guggenheim, I added off the watch list. Maybe I want to put it on the watch list now. However you want to manage that process. All right, so I've made my manual decisions. I may have gone into a client or two and made those final decisions. How do I kind of wrap my head around all these decisions that have been made across all my clients? A great way to do that is to go into this watch list summary area, which again, if you have the Platinum version, you can go to watch list management and then watch list summary. So from this page here, we can actually look at all the watch list decisions that are being made across all of our clients and manage that into a single report or a single view of information that you may want to take a look at. And again, this page is going to take some time, so I'm just going to hopefully narrow this down real quickly. But what I'm doing here is I can set some filters. So if I just want to look at a certain set of clients, current, prospective, or former clients, if I want to look at a certain client type, 401k plan, foundation, I can do that here. And then I can also look at step 2. I can look at all the investments, or I can just find the investments that are on watch. So let's just keep that off watch, and then click on retrieve data. And what the system's going to do is it's going to look at all my clients that have that are listed in the toolkit. It's going to look at all the watch list decisions. It's first going to look at the monitoring criteria set for that client. It's going to look at any of those manual decisions that I've made, whether I made them in the client or I made them in that global manual decision page. And it's going to show me the final watch list decisions that are being made in the toolkit. Again, this page takes a second or two, so bear with us as this goes through. But this is a really important page that we want to get to look at this information and just give you a feel for how you're using the toolkit to manage that watch list for all the clients, not just individual clients, but all the clients in the toolkit. All right. With all that being said, I have 4 investments. And the reason it took so long is because it was looking through all the clients, but in the end, I only came up with 4 investments. You may have 4 investments, you may have 400 on this page. It just depends on those filters that you've added. But what I have listed here are the 4 investments that are in on my prospective foundation, so that's why it's very narrow universe. What I have listed here are the investments. I have the investments that are listed on watch. How many times they've been listed on watch? It may be 1 or 2 or 5 or 10 investments listed off watch and the total investments. We can see how many are noted for replacement with that replacement flag, and we can see the dollars invested in each of those investments as well. From this page, we can do a couple different things. The first thing, and perhaps the one thing that you may want to look at, is who's invested in this investment. So this Thrive Partners, we can click on the investment name and find that Sam Snead's invested in this investment. If there's more than one client, they'll list all the clients in this investment, and it'll list the monitoring decisions. So whether that investment is on the watch for the IPS, a global decision, or a client decision. From here, we can add notes if we want to, flag the investment as a replacement, and just, again, look at the information on the page. In addition to that, we can add notes globally on this page. We can click on the add. And then also, again, if we wanted to jump in to make some manual decisions, we could make those manual decisions on this page in the very last column. But what I encourage you to do is not only review this information, but print out one of these summary reports, either filtered by client or filtered by investment. And this will give you a hard copy of this decision-making process that you're doing over time. Again, looking at all your clients in your book, not just a single client one at a time with a report. And once we pull this one example up here, again, since I only have 4 investments, this came through pretty quick. But this is listing my client, listing the 4 investments. And actually, that's why there was only 4 investments, because I had 1 client. but this will give me a good feel for exactly what decisions are being made across all of my clients in the toolkit. All right, so again, we have this watch list management area that we can really run through. And one last item that I'm just going to pull up is the investment notes. So again, documenting the notes is an important part of that watch list process. Again, we have the ability to globally go in and document any notes that we need to. We can jump in here and begin to edit any notes, add any new notes into the system that we need to without jumping into a client. So again, these three areas, watch list management, the manual decisions, and then the notes. Three ways that you can jump into the toolkit and globally manage those watch list decisions without having to jump into each individual client. But with that being said, in the end, what many people come to the toolkit for are those client reports. So we need to produce some client reports to show our clients exactly what's going on with their individual plan or portfolio. And obviously, we have several different ways that we can do that. I'm going to pull up, let's pull up Alex here, and pull up some report samples that we have for Alex. Alex may be a good client for you. You've had a whole long history of information stored in the toolkit. And this information will definitely come into play in our reporting, because hopefully you've gone into each of those periods over time, and as this history builds up, again, we've backfilled a lot of this data. But as this period comes into play, September, and as we update the data in December, you'll have the new period. You'll make watch list decisions for this client. And then as you click on this archive button, those watch list decisions are going to be stored and archived in the toolkit. Those decisions will be locked in the toolkit, and then those decisions will be used in our reporting. So how are they used in our reporting? Well, if we jump into our report area, we can run a couple different reports. The first report I'm going to run is our monitoring report. And I'm going to do the monitoring report because it covers the two main areas that most people look at when they're running through the decision-making process with a client. Again, the monitoring report has been in the toolkit for quite some time. And if you're familiar with the toolkit, you can actually create your own custom reports that will utilize any of the report sections available in the toolkit. So as I pull up the monitoring report, I'll note two specific areas, and actually more than two specific areas, but you can build and customize your own report to show these sections. And I'll pull up a sample report of a new section that we just added the other week that will actually cover a lot of other decisions in the watch list process that you may find useful in a custom report as well. So let's pull up our monitoring report and jump into it. So I'm just going to skip through this because I'm sure everyone's familiar with the monitoring report. But as we jump into this monitoring report, we can quickly see in the holding summary area, in the very last column, this watch list decision. Each of the items that are on watch will be noted here on this page. But really, let's jump in and find out why those investments are on watch. So we can jump in and again, depending on the criteria that you're using, you may want to focus in on one or two different sections. So if you're using the fiduciary score, you want to pull up the fiduciary score breakdown. Show that in your report if you're creating a custom report. This will show the 11 different factors and thresholds. If you're not familiar with them, they'll all be listed here. But then down below on this page, it'll run through the fi360 fiduciary score process for the most recent quarter. So this very first investment, this Alger Capital, it's passing all 11 factors and thresholds. And by virtue of that neat feat, it has a fiduciary score of 0. This BlackRock, the very next investment, certainly not a bad option. It's actually failing just one item. And based on that failure, it is actually in the quarter of 15. So that's one way that you can run through, again, pretty quickly the due diligence process, that if you're using the fiduciary score with your clients, a great way to highlight that show the final watch list decision, and show that information in a report for documentation and review. The next section, this isn't good. I apologize. Let me run another report here because I want to show my custom due diligence. Doesn't help if you don't have a good example. Let's run our monitoring report here. Shouldn't take more than a few seconds. But what I want to pull up is, in contrast or in comparison to the fiduciary score breakdown, we have our due diligence section that's just going to cover our custom due diligence now. So if you've created your own custom due diligence, applied it to the IPS, you'll want to include this section in your report. Let's jump into it. All right, here we go. So you'll want to include this due diligence criteria breakdown in a client report that you build. Up at the top of this page, in similar fashion with that fiduciary score breakdown, it's going to list your factors that you've selected, the thresholds that you've selected, the importance level, the periods being evaluated, and that missing data treatment. It also lists, I'm missing it, but it also lists the optional factors on this page just so you can reference that information. But essentially what we're getting here is, again, that custom due diligence that you've built, and what you're showing to the client is that custom due diligence that either they've specified or you've come up with and what you want to use in your process. So just like the breakdown, we have a similar section that looks at the overall decision and whether it's passing or failing, and then the final status of that investment, whether it passes or fails that final watch list status. One item of note is, again, with several of these, they may be historical in nature, so this final check or X may be nice to look at, but you may want to dive down into those periods required and periods evaluated. You can do that by looking at the next section that's pre-built into the monitoring report, but again, an optional section that you may want to add. And by jumping into any of these detail sections, we can get a historical view of your custom due diligence. So if we move from right to left, we're looking at the periods going historically, and we're looking at those due diligence factors for the most recent period. And then again, for this fiduciary score, sorry to scroll up here, but we have some periods that we need to look at, 6 evaluations over 4. So we need to look at 6 most recent, and we can see that only 1 failed, the most recent one, and it's passing that threshold, and we can document that evidence from a historical perspective in this document. The last section, in addition to the commentary, if you've added any notes, obviously you want to add the notes in. The last section you may want to take a look at is the watch list action items. So again, any investment that falls on watch, you can include this section, and that investment that's on watch will automatically appear in this section. And what can you do with this section? You can do a couple things. One, and how the section was originally built, was that you can document your meeting notes. So you've printed this out and you're sitting down with a client, you're documenting the decision. So Pioneer is on the watch list, it's failing the criteria, your recommendation, any notes or thoughts that the client has, you can document the final decision and store that for a historical note in the report. However, you may want to present a little bit more of a professional image. You may want to type out any meeting notes that you have or thoughts on this decision, and you can do that by going back into the notes section. If you're in the notes section, you can certainly document any notes to be added into this watch list area as well. So documenting the watch list commentary and the investment commentary can be done by, oops, I keep opening that same section, can be done by going into the watch list notes area and clicking on that sticky note, that yellow sticky note, or clicking on the add button. Well, take my word for it, it's in there. So those are a couple sections that you may have seen before, all vital to the watch list process. But there's one additional section that I want to bring up, and this is in this new client trending data section that we, oops, so there's our notes. It finally came up, yay. So this client trending section, if we go into our report, again, we have just a report template built in the report center for your client. Or if you're building your custom report, you can add this section into your report as well by going in and let me take a look at this 401k client template. Going in and looking at the performance or the portfolio. And if we add this section in, actually going down here, we can look in this client trends portfolio section. We can add this watch list trends. So we can just include that section. We'll hide everything else. Or it can be part of a more comprehensive trend report that you're building, which we'll pull up right now. But there's a watch list trends that you certainly may want to take a look at if you've been building the history in the system for your client. Let me pull up my example here. And again, this is a history of the fund on a couple different assets. So one's just the growth in assets over time. Portfolio composition over time in terms of asset classes. But then our watch list decisions. So looking at the entire history of the client going back several years, we can look at the watch list decisions that have been made over time. And what we're looking here for this Aegeus, we can see that back in Q4 2008, that wasn't part of our portfolio. But if we jump up to Q3 2010, it was added to the mix. And then from then on, it's been passing our due diligence process. Same with Alger. It actually was on watch for 2008 Q4, but ever since then, it's been passing with flying colors. Another example is this Delaware. It's been on watch for so many periods. Now you can document those periods over time, and then document when it's being replaced and when it's been pulled out of the system, now of the client portfolio. Same for this Fidelity. Again, it had a shorter chain. It was on the watch list for several periods, got replaced, and now we can show that in the system. So this watch list trend section in this client trends areas is a very nice piece that you can add into your reporting to not only show the watch list decisions for the current period, but those watch list decisions that are being made over time, and show the client those watch list decisions for their plan or portfolio. With that being said, I'm all out of things to say. If you do have any questions, again, feel free to type them in and be glad to help answer any questions that you have about watch list management or about the fi360 toolkit in general.